Good morning once again. I'm Attorney Alfonso Roma, your professor in Criminal Law Book 1, the Revised Penal Code. This morning we will discuss on provisions of Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code, the principles on generality and territoriality, the history of the Revised Penal Code, a little bit of history in the Revised Penal Code. So, we'll start. Now, the revised penal code is about 90 years old. The revised penal code took effect on January 1st, 1932, and it's a revision from the old penal code enforced in the Philippines since around July 14, 1887. And then that old penal code from the Philippines enforced before was based on Spanish Spanish Penal Code of 1870. That's old penal code provisions. So the revised penal code that we have here is an very old penal code exists that was based also on very old document used before. So that's a little bit of history of the revised penal code. And today we will discuss on provisions of Article 2, this the application of the revised penal code. We have, I think we have already discussed the theory of or the principles of generality, and to review a bit more on generality, it speaks about the application of our criminal laws to every person, whether citizens or a foreigner, as long as it applies to every person's situated in the Philippines. Now, that's the principles of generality. The principles of territoriality is that the revised penal code or any other penal codes we have here in the Philippines is applicable only to to or within the jurisdiction of the Philippines. You cannot apply the revised penal code outside of its jurisdiction, except as we will discuss later in this lecture. Of course, it's common sense that the provisions of the criminal law or the provisions of the revised penal code and other special penal laws is only applicable within its territory. We have no business in applying. We have no sovereign rights to apply our laws on other nations. So that's basic concept of international law and sovereignty and jurisdiction. Now we have discussed the general principles of, or applications of the revised penal code and the theory or the principles of territoriality. If you will read on the provisions of Article 2 of the revised penal code, it provides the application of the revised penal code. We are talking about the revised penal code because the subject mainly is covered by the revised penal code. Other special penal laws are also criminal laws, but in this subject we will just mostly deal with the provisions of the revised penal code. Now go on to the Article 2 of the revised penal code application. We will first discuss the general application and then we'll discuss on the exceptions as provided by law and on other topics. Now again, the revised penal code is applicable only in the Philippines. That is the general rule. The exceptions are First is can be found in the provisions of Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code. The general rule, the Revised Penal Code, again, is applicable only in the Philippines, except first paragraph of the Article 2, and that would be outside the jurisdiction of the Philippines if a person should commit an offense while in on Philippine ship or airship. What do you mean by that? A Philippine ship or airship or aircraft or watercraft. If a person committed a crime within or while on Philippine ship or airship, regardless of the location of the airship or watercraft or ship or airship, that's airplane or a ship. Now, regardless sa iyang location, the provisions of the revised penal code applies if the offense is committed while in Philippine ship or airship. The revised penal code uses the term offense. Later on, you will distinguish the difference between offense, the term offense, and the term felony or felonies. Now, the revised penal code uses the term offense so that if the offense, so that the if the act is covered by the special penal laws, the provisions of Article 2 also applies. It also applies to, of course, it applies to revised penal code crimes as defined therein, and also on special penal laws. Special penal laws are other laws enacted by the Congress after the revised penal code, or it is additional law not incorporated or not included in the revised penal code that is called special penal laws. Now back on the Philippine ship or airship. So how do you determine if the ship is in fact a Philippine ship or if the airplane is a Philippine airplane? Is it the ownership of the the ship or is it the registration? Now, if you will research on that, it is the registration that determines whether the ship or airship or aircraft or watercraft is if a Philippine watercraft or aircraft or airplane. So it is the registration that determines whether or not the ship or airship is in fact Philippine airship or ship or airship. Now, would it matter if the ship or airship is a private or public vehicle or ship? It does not matter. The law does not distinguish whether or not the ship or airship is of private or public utility. What matters or what determines whether the revised penal code applies outside its jurisdiction is that the aircraft or watercraft or ship or airplane is in fact registered in the Philippines. The revised penal code, regardless of the location of the airplane or ship, applies if the person while on that ship or airship commits a crime. Now, second, exceptions to the rule on territorial jurisdiction of the or territorial application of the revised penal code is the forgery or counterfeiting. The crime of forgery or counterfeiting, regardless kung asa na gigama, then the person who committed forgery or counterfeit coin, note, or obligation issued by the Philippine island, that person is liable under our laws. So if mo commit sa crime of forgery in, say for example, in Indonesia or in Malaysia, he can still be prosecuted here in the Philippines regardless wala siya sa jurisdiction sa Philippines, because that's the exception to the rule on territorial jurisdiction and application of the revised penal code. The third one is introduction. Introduction, i-introduce or gi, gi, gigamit diri ang falsified or forged coin, note, or obligation issued by the Philippine island. Now, kanang pag-introduce, regardless kung siya gabuhat o dili, the fact of forgery was done by the person introducing coin, forged coin or note, he will be held liable regardless again of the the person who forged it, regardless of, again, of the location of the person who forged it. So yung introduce into the Philippines the forged currency, note, or coin, regardless kung asa nagibuhat ang pag-forge and regardless kung kinsay kabuhat pag forged coin or note. Now, the third exception to the territoriality or jurisdiction and application of the revised penal code is public employee. While being public officers or employee should commit an offense in the exercise of their function. Now, if you know the crime that may be committed by public employee or public officer while in the performance of their function, regardless kung asa na sila na nila gibuhat, regardless kung outside sa jurisdiction sa Philippines, they will be liable. Now, if you know the crime or any crime that may be committed by public officials or employee while exercising the official function, you may comment it on the comment section. And then last will be the oop, last will be the provision should commit any crimes against national security and the laws of nation. National security can be found in Book 2, Title 1 of the revised penal code. That means national security and laws of nation. So the person in wherever he may commit those crimes may be held liable and may be prosecuted here in the Philippines regardless of whether where he committed the crime.